If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to the fifth and final episode of our Speculative Whiteness column. My name is Alan Bailey and I am your co-host. In the fifth episode of this column, we flip the script and discuss how writers can pursue equity in their writing, how to deal with problematic creators, how Dr. Carroll deals with the toxicity of reading alt-right works, and authors who are great examples of anti-fascist writing. Dr. Jordan S. Caroll is the author of Speculative Whiteness, Science Fiction and the Alt-Right, published by the University of Minnesota Press in 2024, and Reading the Obscene, Transgressive Editors and the Class Politics of U.S. Literature, published by Stanford University Press, 2021. His latest book is a Hugo Award winner for Best Related Work, and his first book won the MLA Prize for Independent Scholars. He was also the recipient of the David G. Hartwell Emerging Scholar Award by the International Association for the Fantastic and the Arts. Carroll's writing has appeared in Kaleidotrope, American Literature, Post 45, Polygon, and the Los Angeles Review of Books and the Nation. You can find a link to his publisher's site in the notes. So we kind of talked about the alt-right and science fiction, and we've kind of gone through all their terms and everything. So now I kind of want to look at the opposite side of it. How do you deal with those kind of people, and what's some of the good stuff, you know? Let me start by asking, how do writers pursue racial equity in their writing?
I mean, I think that it's important for science fiction and fantasy writers and other genre writers as well to read a wide variety of authors from different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages, and to try to take into consideration larger audiences of people who are different from them, and to be in conversation with other authors from different backgrounds and different perspectives. I also think that if writers want to pursue racial equity in their writing, they also need to interrogate the genre tropes handed down from previous generations. Often, science fiction and fantasy, by taking problematic ideas and dressing them up as about another world, can launder those and give those a life that they wouldn't have otherwise, because we don't think, okay, well, the Martian in this case represents this, or whatever, the orc represents this. So I think taking a step back and thinking, what does this image or story structure really mean? How did it originate? How does it function? For example, I think that authors should avoid writing stories where history is made by the special elite that has a genetic destiny to change the world, or where the world is filled with inherently evil beings that must be destroyed. So I think that writers can pursue racial equity by being more inclusive in their reading, in their audiences, in their conversations, but also by being more critical and discerning about the history of science fiction and fantasy as a genre.
So when you're reading something and you love it, and then all of a sudden, like, you get like something like a really racist comes up, or something misogynistic comes up, or let's take Neil Gaiman as an example. You know, you're a big fan of an author. You know, I was a big fan of Neil Gaiman for a long time, and then all of a sudden you find out all this horrible shit about this person, right? Like, how do you deal personally with problematic creators like that?
I think it depends in part on the creator. And I think that everybody can have their own answer for this. I don't know that there's a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. But if the creator is alive, I think your first and foremost concern should be, are you materially supporting them and their causes? If you are buying something from a creator that is truly problematic, where's that money going? I think that you would probably want to think twice and avoid giving money to, say, an author who supports causes that you are vehemently opposed to. If they're dead, I think that changes the calculus there. You might have more leeway. I think there are some problematic creators that are a mix of good and bad. Others, as I've suggested before, can be a kind of diagnostic tool. They allow you to see what's wrong with a particular ideology. They allow you to see an example of a kind of thinking or the consequences of a kind of thinking. Others, I think, probably are best just left in the dustbin of history. I don't think that we need to preserve every creator's work in our reading and our circulation. Some things can go hide in the archives, I think, and we don't need to keep them current. So at the same time, though, I do think that it's fine to read problematic creators within reason. The fan worship of problematic creators is something that really troubles me. People who are unwilling to come to terms with the problems that are inherent to their favorite authors and who want to dismiss any concerns about them. I feel like it's one thing to read somebody because they are influential to the genre. Maybe they have something to say in parts of their work, but not in others, or they're useful as a way of understanding history. It's another thing to put a problematic creator up on a pedestal and defend them from all criticism. That seems like an unhelpful strategy to me.
Yeah. Good examples, I think. Back in the first part of this series, we talked about Philip K. Dick a lot, and he's now fairly well known for being a misogynist, and Robert Heinlein, who definitely had problematic views throughout his career, right? So I think those are both good examples of people that are passed away and have contributed to the genre, but also maybe you want to read with a critical eye.
Definitely.
Dealing with Neil Gaiman, that really that was kind of a blow to me. I've been a Neil Gaiman fan for quite some time. I went and saw him speak a couple of years ago, probably about a year before all this stuff came out about him. And what I did was I got rid of all of his books except for the couple that really mean a lot to me, and that was Cemetery. Oh my God, now I'm forgetting the name of it. The Sandman comic books, and oh my God,
The Graveyard Book.
The Graveyard Book. Dear God, The Graveyard Book. Yes. A little bit earlier, we were talking about pursuing racial equity in writing. So who are some authors that haven't been appropriated by the alt-right, and what is it about their writing that has kept them from being appropriated?
I mean, I think obviously there are many Afrofuturists and other authors of color who are not appropriated by the alt-right. And we could talk more about that in a moment. But also, I think that the alt-right is allergic to queer authors or authors who write queer literature. In the book, I talk about Chuck Tingle as a kind of anti-fascist author. But I think that the larger queer tradition, including authors like Samuel Delany, offers a useful rejoinder to the alt-right because it's a way of looking at the world that doesn't believe in coherent essential identities, a way of looking at the world that celebrates hybridity and impurity, and a way of the world that looking at the world that is kind of not interested in keeping everybody in their separate places. It's a literature that celebrates different encounters, exchanges, and mixtures, and that has no interest in homogenous communities of like-minded people from the same background. So I think queer fiction is a great way of responding to the far right. And I also think that there are plenty of science fiction authors that come from a kind of materialist or historicist perspective as well that don't seem amenable to fascist appropriations. I mean, it's telling that, for example, I don't think anybody on the far right is interested in Kim Stanley Robinson. And I think that's because he sees history not as the heroic destiny of great peoples or great individuals, but as the unfolding of contradictions in these immense historical structures that no one individual is necessarily responsible for. So I think that that is another way of resisting fascism, refusing to see history as a kind of Manichaean or heroic struggle between good and evil, and seeing it instead from a materialistic or historicist perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like to me like basically including the community in your book. I mean, taking away that lone hero and making the hero the community, or a
Yeah,
larger group of people.
yeah. Thinking of history as made by the people, made by the masses, not by the lone dictator or the terrorist or the heroic soldier or something like that. Yeah.
What is some great anti-racist spec fic, and what makes it that way?
In the book, I look at a number of different authors, N.K. Jemison's work. I look at Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, Terry Bisson's Fire on the Mountain, Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower series. And I also look at Jean Luang Yang's Superman Smashes the Klan, which is a graphic novel that's well worth reading. It's based on like the actual history of Superman radio narratives being used as a way to mock the Klan and kind of satirize their different rituals and their different kind of sayings and things like that. But I think what ties these all together, and this kind of links back to our earlier question, which is this idea that history is not made by one particular racial group or one particular individual. I think what they suggest is that tomorrow belongs to everyone, essentially. That whatever history is going to be, whatever the future is going to be, nobody has a monopoly on it. It's something that we are all going to make together. And I should also emphasize that aspect of making. History is not something that unfolds. It's not something that is the product of any one destiny. It's not something that is already there and that we just have to sort of uncover it. It's something that we have to negotiate and build together, and build in a democratic way, in an anti-racist way, rather than simply something that emerges from some great hero imposing the future on us all.
Love that. Love that. In your estimation, is science fiction, fantasy, and horror important to the future? Can we use this to improve things?
I definitely think it is. I think that speculative fiction is now the dominant genre of our time. It's certainly central to mass culture, whether that be video games, film, or television. It's one of the dominant literary genres, but it's also central to how technologists and politicians and others think about innovation and more broadly the future. So I think it's a key site of discourse, a key place where people figure out who they are and what the future is going to be. It's also a place that allows us to propose alternative utopias, and to recognize that the present order of things will not continue forever. So I don't think that science fiction and other speculative genres is enough. I don't think history will be made by the storytellers. It'll be made by ordinary people fighting those in power. But at the same time, I think that it's important that we make sure that we are telling stories that imagine a better future and that suggest that that better future will be something that we're all part of and that we're all working to build.
Awesome. Great. So you spent a lot of time reading through these alt-right science fiction stories, right? You mentioned that you skimmed through them a lot, which I could totally understand. At some point, I feel like though that would stress you out? What were some ways that you were able to get through all that stuff without feeling like you were poisoning yourself?
I mean, I don't know that I succeeded in not poisoning myself. I felt pretty bad after a lot of these. And eventually it got to the point where I would, I would see a film and I would think, well, what would a fascist think of that? And I would start to sort of put together the fascist reading of this particular thing I was looking at. And that was when I realized I needed to take a break. I had bad dreams. It was a bad time. It was not fun to read a lot of this stuff. And it was especially bad when it was something that was sort of uneven, where there are moments where the author or the podcaster or whoever, did not seem horrific all the time, and then they would suddenly say something, and it would just you'd be taken aback by them. They would sound like a normal science fiction fan one minute, and then they would say something that sounded just like absolutely awful, and right after you've sort of not exactly, you almost let your guard down in that moment. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty miserable to go through this stuff. And yeah, I think my way of dealing with it has been to try to back away from it and not engage with it as much anymore.
Yeah, I could totally see that giving me nightmares as well. So that brings us to the end of all the questions. I want to say thank you so much for coming on and spending, gosh, like, I don't know, probably over 2 hours at this point chatting with me about all this different stuff. I've really appreciated it. I really enjoyed your book. I know at least Cat Rambo went out and got a copy and read it. People are, reading this and thinking about things. So I really appreciate this work that you've done.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that wraps up the Speculative Whiteness column. Our thanks to Dr. Jordan Carroll for his time. If you like what we're doing, please rate and review us. You can find us on Patreon and Ko-fi, Ko-fi, if you'd like to support us monetarily. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.